Hey, and welcome to Trail Trials, a video review section of iRunFar.com. My name is Travis Lyles, and in this video, we're going to take a look at the Speedland GL PDX. Let's check it out. All right, so let's start off with the statistics. This is a 5mm drop from heel to toe, coming in at 35 at the heel, 28 at the toe. This is a unisex shoe in a men's size 9, women's 10.5. This is about a 10.5 ounce shoe. It has the BOA lacing, both forward and backwards, and instead of having two BOA dials, this one has a strap actually up here. It is the GL platform, which is how Speedland tends to do shoes. So this is that versus the GS. GL, so a little lower to the ground, a little shorter on the foam, maybe a little more narrow than that shoe. Kind of luggy. It comes with this green colorway, the PDX edition does. This is the color of the St. John's Bridge. It's supposed to take inspiration from Forest Park, which is a giant park right here in the city of Portland, just back that way, that I actually ran a bunch of the miles of this shoe in. So with all that said, let's get up close and personal. Let's see what this shoe is all about. Let's start off by taking a look at the outsole here. And so first thing you might notice is this is Michelin rubber, like the tire company. Even a little Michelin man waving here on the bottom. Overall, really good tread pattern and sort of grip compound. I felt really good and sort of confident when I was wearing these. You can see they're pretty toothy. These are 6.5mm lugs, which is fairly long, especially when you kind of compare that to a lot of stuff out there that is a little more lower profile. So these do bite, they do grip. When I wore these in wet and muddy-ish type conditions, I always felt like they gripped really well. No complaints on the rubber. Didn't feel like they were slick if I wore them for a road run and stepped on kind of the white lines that get slick with organic material, especially here in Portland in the rainy season. These didn't seem to sort of have a problem sliding around on that, which is definitely not the case with all trail shoes. So I think overall, a really good tread pattern. It's deep enough, it's flexible enough on the bottom that the shoe kind of grips and molds, and I think this shoe excels on really kind of the gravelly, loose type of stuff versus, I think, more mountainy hard, but that has more to do with the fit, which I'll talk about here in a second, and less to do with the compound. I think overall, this is the first pair of shoes I've had with Michelin rubber, and I don't have any complaints at all. I think one other sort of area of note is this little dot right here. And if we look closely here, it actually says to cut out for drainage. And so this shoe, as you can see, is kind of buttoned up pretty tight. You've got some overlays and some other things here. If you're going to be going in water a lot and you want the shoe to drain better, it literally has a drain plug, which I think is kind of interesting. Obviously, once you pop this out, that's the end of it, right? And you're always going to have that hole there, but it lets water out. A couple other things to note here. You can see sort of this midsole poking through on the bottom. This is a 10.5 ounce shoe, so not heavy, not light, but that is one way that they're saving some weight on the bottom. I never really noticed anything kind of poking through in these areas, but obviously those are slightly weaker spots that you might want to look out for because there's not a rock plate in here. Okay, next up is the midsole, and being the GL line, this is considerably shorter stack height. As I mentioned, it's a 5mm drop, so the drop is still pretty low, but when you compare it to, say, something like the GS, the difference is pretty substantial when it comes to the size of the midsole. And so I'll just pop in the GS TAM here as an example. And so if you look at this green here, and then you look at this white here, it's a considerable amount of material additional up here. Now your foot does sit inside this GS a little bit more, but of the two, this is just a more lower profile type of shoe that feels a little more controllable, feels a little more athletically fit. And this is an HTPU midsole, which is similar, I think, in feel and kind of bounce to, like, say, some of the Saucony shoes that have this styrofoamy, you see it like pebbly type of look. It's got that same sort of feel, very high rebound, feels very cushioned. It is single density all the way around, but you get some sort of looks at this midsole. Again, it's not too tall, but it provides plenty of of cushion without being over the top. This is probably a medium cushion type of shoe if I was to compare it like to the industry at large. The other thing I'll have to call out on this in particular is the way that the shoe sort of leverages the midsole sock liner insert type of thing, and you can see it here. It's very, very thick, and so this is a look at that, and this is amped up a little bit on the arch, but it's very thick, and this is a big part of the midsole. This shoe can't take insoles if that's what you're into. These are specific to the shoe and really a big part of it. So this plays a big piece. So on top of that foam that you're looking at here, and you saw on the bottom, and you see this sort of green color that's here as well, these all play a part in kind of this overall cushioning that you're getting with the shoe. And this is, again, similar to the Saucony line of the Peregrine that I've talked about. This entire sock liner here is all made out of that same TPU type of foam, and so it's very high rebound, feels really good, and doesn't wear down, so there's no pitting in here. This is meant to last a long time, and I'd say as far as foot beds go, these are like very high-end foot beds, at least in terms of durability. You're not getting a bunch of like places where the foam is busted out and getting flat and those types of things. That's just not what's going to go on here, because this is definitely like a midsole type of foam that they're using for that part. The other thing I'll note here is that there is a place to add a carbon plate, and so you get a view of that here. It simply snaps on here. It's an additional part that you can order from, and it just sits down here in this sort of midsole, clips onto the bottom, and then you pop that back into the shoe, and you've got a shoe with a carbon plate on it. So for that point I made earlier about sort of some of these weak points, one, it's a carbon plate that can be used for additional protection, but also in the carbon world, having a little more pep in your step and adding some spring to your run. So wanted to call that out as like this, even though it's not midsole, it's part of what Speedland considers sort of their midsole technology. Okay, so let's take a look at the upper. Again, interesting concepts here. This has two things that are a little bit different than some of the other Speedlands, or I guess one thing that's different. And BOA is very, very common, of course, on these shoes. And the way that the BOA system works is pretty simple. This is a two-way BOA, and so you can pull this out, and that gives you all of your stretch here. You can see that the cords come out, and then you push this in, and you're able to put your foot in, twist that down, and you can see the shoe getting tighter. Now, what's interesting about this is that it also goes the other way. And so if we pop out, we get a little more space. And if we pop, so you can really, I guess, lack of a better term, dial this in. And so if you get that fit on your foot, and so these wires sort of crisscross, and they go over to effectively these two pieces of fabric over here. These are a little bit gross from the weather here, but you can see these things are going to come across. One's connected on kind of right behind sort of the back of your big toe, and this one's a little bit more through that arch area of your foot. And so you're going to get this sort of squeeze down here at the bottom, and it adds a really sort of consistent pull, and it's putting really a connection between this side of the shoe, the medial and lateral parts of the shoe, and creating a bit of a wrap here. And I actually really liked that part of this shoe and the way that it fit. The other thing here is this upper strap. And so this is not common. The other GL model does not have this, as well as the TAM doesn't have this either. And this is a strap that you can sort of pull down and pull across. And then that also has a couple of areas that it's connecting to at this back part of the heel and across the top of your foot. And again, on that sort of arch inside of your foot and pulling that across. What I will say is that in general, the lower part of this shoe, I was able to really lock down. The upper part of this shoe, I wasn't. And I think a majority of it is I use upper eyelets on my shoes to tie them and to really create a lock. You can't really create a lock because there's nothing here that like pulls these things together. It's more of you're creating a piece of, I don't know, pressure here, but the heel is still sort of independent. So it doesn't like really, I think, bring all this sort of together by creating tension here and here that sort of pulls this together. it's more in the front. Now, does it work? Sure. But if it's over really technical stuff, this is not really my favorite type of fit. But if you've got a higher volume foot, maybe it works just fine. And just for maybe a piece of comparison, I'll give you a show at the TAM here, the GS TAM. And first thing I'll call out is sort of the lacing system. This one has 2 dials versus 1. Again, they're the same type of thing, but this dial goes up higher, so you're trading a dial for this strap. I don't know that one does anything different necessarily than the other, but just worth calling out. I felt like this strap worked better than the secondary dial. Neither one of them was really like super locked down for me in the upper part. Bottom part of the foot, just fine. Okay, let's call out another couple of things here. On the upper, there's some stretchy material down here on the foot. It is a fairly wide fit across the shoe, so even though this is a more narrow fit than, say, the TAM that I just showed, there's still quite a bit of room in here. And I would compare this to like a Topo or an Ultra, sort of in the fit, in that it's a little bit wider, it's a little bit more comfortable. I mean, it's a shoe that you can just sort of slide your foot into really easily, especially if these things aren't locked down and just sort of like have kind of hanging off your foot. And then of course you can, do all these various things here to lock it down. But it's a very comfortable type of fit, plenty of room for your toes. There's stretchy fabric here at the top that has kind of just enough movement in it, doesn't make your toes feel too locked in. And then there's overlays on the front to sort of keep the water out and those types of things. And then as you move across the back, you see this same type of like engineered material all the way around. This calls out the carbon plate that you can put in the shoe. And so for the most part, it's really a very fabric-y, sort of unstructured, not too bad upper. The only thing that sort of adds structure here is that you've got this like hard little boa thing here. And so if you've got a sensitive part of your foot and you really have to lock this thing down, that could be a problem. I actually experienced that on the TAMs. I didn't experience that at all on this shoe. And then the last thing I'll call out here is the heel collar. It is a structured heel collar from here down, which there's a little gator attachment there, I guess, to call out as well. There's some pads in here, but to my point about this strap, I was never able to fully sort of lock it down to the fit that I exactly wanted with these mechanisms. And then the last thing I think I want to show is sort of, I think, width of what you're getting into between these two models, because again, the Speedland series sort of goes GL and GS, and those platforms sort of arranged different. This is a top-down view of the GS TAM, and you can see that it is significantly wider. These are both men's 9.5s, but the amount of sort of volume that is different between these two is pretty significant. I would probably say almost an inch in width if you were to go from this here to this here. And so just something to keep in mind. If you've got a really wide foot, like, you've got options here. I would still say this is a more generous fit than a lot of shoes, but you do have options in the way that these things fit. And of course, with the BOA systems, you got a way to dial it down. In closing, what's this shoe do really well? Well, I would say, for me, my foot, always kind of the caveat here, this shoe does really well on, to me, more groomed fire road, gravel, stuff that doesn't have a lot of twists and turns and sort of technical terrain on it, because just for my heel, I can't get it to lock down the way that I want, despite this kind of nice midfoot wrap and even this strap across the top. It alleviated the pressure that I had with the TAMs, the GSs, with the dials kind of pushing on my foot, but I still was never able to like lock it down enough. There just wasn't enough here in this space because it's kind of loose and floppy. And again, you don't have upper eyelets, which I always use on all of my shoes, and some shoes I even add upper eyelets to. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of extra knowledge on where my foot fits in. So this is, this is a fat tire bike. That's what I feel like about these shoes. When I was on longer distance, gravelly, kind of groomed or dirt type trail, this thing just loped and did its thing and felt really good. And my foot could expand and the grip felt really good on the bottom of it. And it was comfortable with this, nice foam and this really thick midsole and really thick insole that's in there as well. It just really performed well on that. Where it didn't perform well is where I wanted my foot to be locked in, and I just couldn't ever quite get that. So who's this for? Well, I'd say if you're doing a bunch of technical terrain and you've got a narrower heel, this might not be exactly it. And I don't know if any of the Speedlands are it if you've got a low volume foot and kind of a narrow heel, because it's just hard to like get it locked in despite having all these cool dials and things like that. If you've got a more high volume foot that takes up a lot of space and you're into ultras and topos and that style, these might actually work even better because you can get a little bit more dialed in fit, I feel like, in these than some of those types of shoes. Plus you're not fighting a zero drop, this being at a 5mm. So overall, lots of cool stuff on this shoe. Feels well, it's comfortable, does really great on, like I mentioned, that less technical terrain, longer distance. Seems to be holding up really well. The insole is super thick. The midsole is really comfortable. It grips well. There's all kinds of fun customizations, like you can add a carbon plate. You can pop holes out of this to let the shoe drain. So there's a lot of technology and a lot of ideas thrown in here, which I think is just fun for the industry in general. Bonus that it's PDX colors and I live in Portland. So any questions, comments, place those below this video. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.